Hello and welcome. I'm making a brief video here to go over the Lesson 7 guided lab. Let's get started. This lab is about landslides, and hopefully you're learning a lot more about landslides this week. They're kind of an understudied natural disaster, but they cause more financial damage in the U.S. each year than all of the other types of natural disasters. So let's get started. We're going to start here on this map provided by, by the USGS. And at first, we're just going to get familiar with the map and look at places that are of interest to you. So let's take a look at my area. I live just west of Denver in this area here, kind of on this orange patch. So I look here, and there's two things that I'm looking for, both the color and the pattern. So some areas have no pattern, some areas have these crosshatches, and some areas have dots. And then we have some areas that have a pattern and color, and others that don't. So we're going to take a look at what that means. If I come over here, the color tells me if there's high, moderate, or low landslide incidence. So that means of this area, how much of it is affected by a landslide. So this area may have more than 15% of the region could be involved in landslides. But then we want to look at landslide susceptibility and whether that is Hello, and thank you for watching this video. I created this video to talk about some of the things that are covered in the guided lab for Lesson 7 on landslides. So landslides are one of the lesser studied natural disasters, perhaps understudied, because they cause more financial damage each year than all of the other types of natural disasters in the United States. So we're going to go through a few things in this lab. Let's get started. We're going to start here on this map that is produced by the USGS. Now, this map can be a little bit confusing because it uses some terms we're not familiar with. It talks about the incidence of landslides and the susceptibility of landslides. And you're going to look at an area of interest to you, but let's talk about what we're looking at first. According to the USGS, the incidence was assigned based on the number of landslides that had occurred there in the past. And so high incidence was assigned to areas where more than 15% of the area had been involved in landsliding in the past. Medium incidence areas were those where 1.5 to 15% of the land area has been involved in landslides in the past. And then low incidence is where it's less than 1.5% having happened in the past. Then when we look at the term susceptibility, that's where they're actually looking at the geology. They're looking at the types of rocks and the types of soils to try and get a better understanding of how susceptible that rock is to landslides. So one of them is based on what's happened in the past, and one is more of a prediction of what will happen in the future, although what happens in the past is a prediction of what happens in the future as well. So it's just kind of two different ways of looking at this data when we look at this map. So let's take a look at an area that might be of interest. I'm actually going to take a look here at the Denver area. This is where I live, kind of west of Denver, probably on the edge between this orange area and this dotted area. If you notice, we've got three different colors on the map, yellow, orange, and red. And we also have three different patterns, like no pattern, hash lines, and dots. So we're going to take a look here. I'm going to consider myself to be in this dotted area between the orange and the yellow. So let's go back, and if I look here on my legend, I find that this area has not had many landslides in the past. The landslide incidence is low, but it has a moderate landslide susceptibility based on the types of rock. That is probably true in my region. My personal home is in a large flat area, so it is not highly susceptible to landslides, so that's good. But if I were going to answer this question over here of number one, write a place, I would call that Golden, Colorado. It is in the golden or yellow zone, and that means that there is a low landslide incidence. I might also add that it is considered a moderate susceptibility because of the types of rocks. So the next question asks, All of the regions with the highest incidence rates, red, are mountainous. Is this correlation coincidental? Explain your reasoning. Well, if we're looking at where landslides have happened in the past, it just seems intuitive that we need a slope to have a landslide. It may not always be as steep of a slope as you would think, but steeper slopes are more susceptible, and you cannot have a landslide in a large flat field. So no, that's not coincidence. Name two of the regions of the world, not in the US, where you think topography would likely result in a high incidence of mass wasting. So I want you to think of regions, not countries. If I said Russia, that's way too big. That's like saying the United States. But I can see that not all of the United States has a high incidence. Same with something like Australia. But let's think about smaller regions. I could say the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachian Mountains. Places like this in the United States have a high susceptibility. Can I think of areas like that in other countries? That should be a start on what kind of scale we're looking at. All right, the next thing we're going to look at is part 2, how do landslides affect people? Now for this, you've got a couple articles to read. One of these is about Spring Hill, which is an area in North Salt Lake, Utah, and some homes here that are being destroyed by landslides. The next section is on a home in New York, northern New York, that is, which I believe is the Catskill Mountains up there, that's also being affected by a landslide. Now, with landslides, I think sometimes we tend to picture these big, fast events, but which is true, and we'll definitely be looking at some landslides like that in our case study next week. But what is also true is they're also very slow-moving landslides, and that's what both of these articles are about. This one in New York is moving about 2 inches to 2 feet a day. But even if you think about 2 inches a day, that's 14 inches a week. That's over a foot per week. And if I thought about the ground under my house moving at a foot per week, was 52 feet in a year. That's significant and not something that my house can cope with. And so it would be completely destroyed. I don't remember the rates on the Spring Hill landslide, but it is similarly slow. And these homes are just very slowly being torn apart until they're structurally unsound and unfit for human habitation, and they have to be abandoned. Now, one of the things that's interesting is because landslides are so difficult to predict, they're often not covered by insurance. And so both of these articles will talk about a little bit about how people are facing the financial burden of having their homes destroyed by landslides. And one of the questions for you in the guided lab, do you think the federal, state, and or local governments have a responsibility to the homeowners in the Spring Hill, Utah neighborhood? Explain your reasoning and be elaborate. This is worth a lot of points. All right, so this is worth a lot of points, and so I want you to have a thorough answer. There's a number of articles posted in the discussion board that you can read, but I also encourage you to do some of your own research to look into this issue. And it is complicated. I want us to think about a number of things. There's the idea of fairness, that some people should have known that these were risky areas that they moved into, and now they're asking other people to help them rebuild their houses. But there's also issues of practicality. If we have neighborhoods that go homeless, those people are most likely going to declare bankruptcy and or become homeless, which also places a burden on society. And so these are things worth thinking about, that these problems don't just go away, regardless of who bears the greatest brunt of the problem. So think about these things and give me a thorough, thoughtful answer, not just a knee-jerk reaction. So let's keep going. Part 3 is recognizing landslides. This is kind of a little fun activity because it gives you 3 different scenarios of people who are trying to buy homes, and they're kind of written fun, so that's fun. There's some information about how you learn to recognize landslides, but let's take a look at some of these pictures. Here's our first home. What a lovely mansion. Look at the trees in the back. The yard drops off to the spring below. But then we see some problems, some cracks in the foundation of the house, this large crack in the yard with what used to be a straight fence but isn't anymore. So we know that that's fairly recent, younger than that fence at least. Cracks in the street, a sideways mailbox, cracks in the sidewalk. What do you think might be happening to this home? Is dream home number 1 a dream or a nightmare? Write a response below to let me know what you think. Dream home 2. Take a look at this. This is, it gives you some information to look at before you respond to any of these. And I do hope that expect you to draw on this, actually in this first one it doesn't, but to draw on this additional information as you look through these. So there's a website from the Utah Geological Survey about rock falls in Provo that you can look at and to get some information. But you should notice just some things that make sense. We've got a boulder this far in the house and a lot more boulders up here and these slopes. What do we think about that home? This last one, we want to put a home right here. These geologic features are called alluvial fans, and these happen in areas where you have periodic stream flow. So you don't have stream flow all the time, but then when you have it, the stream will pick up a lot of, it's like a flash flood. So it'll pick up a lot of rocks and debris and then dump it as a fan. And these kind of look like, Chinese fans that you would wave. So some other things that it mentions here that are important is that there were recent forest fires here. Forest fires actually can have a large impact on landslides because the forest fire will kill the trees, which will diminish the root system that holds the soil in place, and it also damages or kills much of the surface vegetation that also holds that soil in place. Interestingly enough, as on a side note, they actually have experimental forests. There's one here in Colorado, not far from my home. And this is a large forest that universities actually will experiment on, and they will try to find similar areas, and they'll burn one down and then collect data on the effects of that. They'll collect data on the runoff, on the landslide potential, and a lot of those different things. So we don't just have our experience, we actually have experiments where we study and look at these things. And we do know that forest fires can have a big impact on causing landslides. So that's something to consider. There's a video in here that the link doesn't work, but you can use this search to find it. And I'm going to show you that video now because it's really interesting. So let me pull this up and we're going to start it.
This is horrible. This is horrible. Took my poor mailbox down. Look at it. Boulders, big as wheelbarrows. Good night. Never saw anything like this in my life. I can stay away from my house. Look at the boulders over there. Look at the size of them things. They're moving.
Okay, now that's not great video quality, but this is a post-fire debris flow. So after a fire, because that soil was loosened up, then we had a heavy rain in an area that was not used to rain, kind of like this area that they're describing. And And so it wasn't able to soak into the ground, and because the soil was loosened, it just caused this massive debris flow that kind of feeds on itself, picking up the soil and rock and causing this massive mud flow. I guess it's hard to think of a mud flow as a landslide, but it is actually a type of landslide. And forest fires can also have an impact on your more, I guess, traditional type of landslide as well, where you just have the land sliding. We'll talk about that a little bit with the Oso landslide. In Washington, some environmentalists blamed logging on the landslide, saying that cutting down the trees affected it. That particular landslide, though, that's likely not the case, because it was the place where the soil actually slipped is well over 100 feet deep, and the tree roots don't usually go that deep. But had it been a smaller, more shallow landslide, that may have been the case. Anyway, I think this hits on the major points for the lab to help you out. If you have any more questions, give me a call or send me an email. Thanks for watching.